Now, we're going to have a panel to discuss some of the issues that we brought up there. So I'm going to welcome John Booth. Hello, John. I can just see you waving there. John is, well, you linked in with the BCS Green SG, as well as lots of other roles. And we're going to welcome Amanda Brock as well. Hello, Amanda from OpenUK. So we've got a few different angles now just to carry on this conversation. We've already had a couple of questions in. I'll see them in later on. But let's start off, shall we, just talking about some of the issues that you've raised. First of all, can I say what a great quote that is, that you can't efficiency to zero. I like that. And maybe that's the title for an article coming soon. But just thinking about user devices. Now, I noticed on your chart, user devices with the biggest chunk of use of resource. And I'm just thinking about the mentality we tend to have of everything needs to be upgraded as soon as possible. And that has a big impact, obviously, on things like rare earth extraction. What can we do to try and change that mindset that everything needs constantly upgrading? Perhaps we could start with you on that, John, from your data center perspective. Well, you're on mute, John.
Yes, well, you know, data centers are buildings that contain significant amounts of IT, but they also contain significant amount of capital plants such as chillers and crack units and power gear and etc. And a lot of this has a 20-year lifespan, which is actually pretty good when you compare it to the ICT, which in a corporate environment is usually only about 3 years. And I actually think that, you know, in terms of the sustainability for what I would call the capital plant items, it's actually pretty good. I would be a bit cautious about how the stuff is then recycled. I think a lot of it goes to landfill. And there have been some European projects recently, such as Circular and Sidachi, which is looking at the circular economy for data centers and saying, you know, these items can be taken out of the data center and refurbished and then put back into other data centers after they've had an upgrade. Or we can start to actually take the raw materials out of them and repurpose them for moving forward. But the whole industry for that is still very embryonic. But I think the industry is aware that something needs to be done. One of the things I think will start to accelerate that is the life cycle analysis requirement that will become a mandatory best practice in the EU Code of Conduct from 2022. And that basically will request that data centers that participate in the code will be required to at least commence a life cycle analysis. And as part of the life cycle analysis, you are required to have environmental product descriptions and to calculate your embodied carbon. So I think that once we've got some real good data on the amount of raw materials in the capital components, then it will be easier to say, right, well, that UPS unit there has got 16 kilograms of copper in it, we can take that out and reuse it instead of going to mine cobalt in Jamaica.
Now, in fact, that's already started to touch on one of the questions we've had in. So I'm going to bring this one straight to the surface. Julian sent a question about incentives to reduce technology churn. Now, I know, Chris, I think you're going to mention this again later when we have our closing debate. Do you want to talk a little bit about the incentives side of things?
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to bear in mind that while we might want to do things as consumers and take kind of various ethical decisions as consumers, in larger organizations, whether we like it or not, it's for reasons which I probably aren't worth going into in too much detail right now. These aren't expressed in the same way. And if you do want to actually see people to see things to be reused, there needs to be some way of actually recognizing that and being credited for this in many ways. And right now, we basically have a system which subsidizes and incentivizes using virgin materials all the time because they come out cheaper, and there is just it's so much more expensive to use recycled things in lots of cases. That said, there are some companies doing some good things around this. Like IT Renew does some nice things about basically taking end-of-life data center computers and then putting them into new boxes. And in the States, there's companies like Runciman, which basically take shipping containers full of end-of-life hyperscale data center things and basically plug them into wind turbines and solar places to provide very, very low cost compute that ends up being very, very green as well. So there are some options there, but it's this is very much like the behavior we're seeing is the behavior we're designing for by default in our existing market. And that really needs to be addressed if you want to have people doing it for reasons other than because they think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you for mentioning IT Renew there, actually, Chris, because Ali Fenn was going to join us. Unfortunately, she couldn't due to circumstances beyond her control. So she just sent her apologies. I'll relay those. Can I come over to you, Amanda, on this? Obviously, you've got your whole philosophy is about things being open. What's your take on this? You're not. Your headset's not working there for some reason.
It's not working. Okay.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. You're on now.
Okay.
Yep.
Brilliant. So let me just take a step back, Brian, if that's okay. I think it probably seems a little bit odd for the CEO of OpenUK to be sitting on a data center panel. So it's probably worth explaining a little bit about the work we are doing on sustainability and data centers. And I think across our supporter base and our partners, what we've seen is a real understanding that to create sustainability, we have to open things up. You're not going to create sustainable technology unless it's open, unless it's transparent, unless you have that trust and break down silos. So what we've been working on, we're going to be hosting a day at COP26 on the 11th of November, and we've been working on a project to build the sustainable data center of the future. Now, for me, I'm very much the open source expert in this, and I'm the catalyst for this project. It's now become known as the Patchwork Kill, and it's known as the Patchwork Kill obviously because of COP and the fact that we're creating this for COP, but it's a patchwork, and it's a patchwork of lots of existing pieces of work going on in open technologies across the board, including working with IT Renew and Ali Fenn on circular economy. She's one of our consortium partners. IT Renew is one of our partners. And what we're looking at is how we can build a new model that's collaborative, that will be released Creative Commons, so shared by everybody, breaking down the silos we see in the work currently being done for data centers and net zero. And it's going to be built on 3 pillars. And the first is decarbonisation. We've not mentioned scope 1 to 3 yet, I don't think, but scope 3 is a big part of circularity and circular economy. And of course, it's all the other indirect emissions that you get around the technologies and the hardware used. Our second pillar is going to be around adoption of open technology. So by sharing the code, we open things up, we allow not just a move towards net zero, but we also create sustainability through that collaboration and partnership. And of course, if you can go in and modify your software yourself, you're going to remove a lot of the issues that you have that close things down and stop sustainability within the system. I mean, if we look at something like CNCF and Cloud Native, which I'll come back to in a minute or two, you see how that really impacts things. And then, of course, with open hardware, you're releasing the designs to create the designs of the tangible artifacts, removing some of the IP barriers. And that in itself goes back to the LCA that John was talking about, because what you see with proprietary hardware is that you have a recycle path of 3 to 5 years, which we can avoid. And we can sort of move away from this obsession with upgrading and renewing by opening things up. And then I guess the third piece there is the open data, which gives transparency. And then our third commitment, our third pillar, is a commitment around transparency, looking more at things like equitable access, allowing member states who do not have the funds that some of the Western world has to access the technologies, and creating a more inclusive economy. And I think all of that leads us to a more trustworthy positioning for the data centers. So that's why we're driving towards an open and transparent data center for the future. And I think that really feeds into what both John and Chris have been saying there on the LCA, on circular economy, making sure your hardware is not just renewable and renewed, as IT Renew would do for you, but also thinking about how we can share that with everyone.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I mean, this is not all about data centers. Let's reduce from data centers to what goes into our pockets. I'm just thinking about the mentalities we have behind the upgrade sort of obsession. There's a subculture, isn't there, a very positive one about promoting repairing things ourselves. And I've had phones that I was able to fiddle about with myself not at the moment, but in the past. Now, is this something we should be fostering as well, a mentality we should be fostering, Chris?
Well, yeah, is a short answer. So the thing is,
nice.
There's various like ways you can do this, right? And you can look to examples in other parts of the world for some good practice. So France have recently passed a law explicitly making this a requirement. But if you look at Finland, you'll see that like if you're getting things repaired, there's no VAT on it, right? So there's all these things which you can do to basically create an incentive to make it more likely. But if you just think around Europe, if you just think about, say, what kind of tools and gadgets and things have been out there, there aren't that many that are designed from a mobile phone front to do this. The only one I can think of, or the most high profile one, is probably, say, Fairphone, all right? And they are continually praised and continually tiny, right, for the last 10 years. And like, this is one of the problems, because there is just, the economics are so much against them that that they only end up appealing to a real set of fans. And this is me, who's been has had multiple generations of them. You really buy them out of love, not because it's economically the right thing to do or a sensible thing. And I don't think it's realistic to expect that from other people. But there are some things they've done which I think are really useful patterns. So they will resort to like modularity, so that you can extend the life of it by making certain parts you can swap in and out. This is some stuff that you could do, and we could actually, again, make this more of a thing that we value in the industry, or we incentivize in the industry. But right now we don't, and that's partly because economics, once again, have been against, say, having modular things like phones. Like, economically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But Fairphone have really been going through it because they've been trying to figure this stuff out. But it's not going to really kind of go very far with just like a lovely but small Dutch company doing this, and no one else really being able to kind of get anywhere with it. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, John, the idea of modularity works in data centers almost by definition, doesn't it? Does it go down to processor level as well, that sort of thing?
Oh, clearly, yeah. Of course, virtualization and some of the big hyperscalers and the way that they do their stuff does, I mean, to be honest, I think that the hyperscalers are doing everything they can to make their operations more sustainable. Energy is a cost to them, so the reduction of energy for them is a high priority item. And you can see the likes of Google and Facebook et al, who have completely redesigned the data center for their own purpose. But essentially they are one customer, and they can do things that other people can't do. Co-location sites, for instance, which have to be all things to all men, have quite defined parameters for their operation temperatures and the humidity in the environment. And they are selling their space on a rack basis. And they have no control over what the customer puts into it. So it's harder for the co-location guys to get anywhere near the efficiencies that a hyperscaler would get. And I think that a lot of people in the iceberg, what I call the iceberg, the underneath the waterline part of the iceberg, which is all the server rooms and small enterprise data centers that are in almost every office building up and down the land. They just don't have the resources to do some of the code of conduct best practices, for instance, and they can never reach the efficiencies that the hyperscalers have got. And they're basically facing a choice of, do we move our commoditized compute into the cloud, where we're going to get ultra high efficiencies, and there's really good reasons for doing that, or do we keep our compute on our site and just put up with the servers running at 10 to 15% at full whack? They haven't got the economies of scale to do that. And I think that's the biggest target that we should be looking for, is these smaller edge type server rooms, data centers across the UK and probably across the world, where we can go in there and we can do some really good stuff for them and reduce their energy bills. I mean, I think I did a study, it was some time ago now, but UK government could save £77 million a year on data center server room energy across all their departments.
Excellent, interesting. So let's move on from the tin then to what runs on the tin. I remember Apple fans in years gone by, one of the reasons they were such fans was that they considered the code to be much more elegant, and I think by that they mostly meant that it wasn't full of bloatware. So I'm going to come over to Amanda. You've got your hand up, so make your comment as well, Amanda. But I'm going to come over to you and talk about economical coding and the role that that plays as well. But first, just make your point you were going to make.
Yeah, I've actually got a list of points here based on what John and Chris have just said.
Okay.
If I start at the end with what John was saying about edge, one of the things that we're looking at with our data center model is moving it to an edge-based model, partly because what we can do there is we can look at bringing everything closer to the consumer, and we can recycle and repurpose derelict property, derelict stock, which is going to be an awful lot more of post-pandemic in city centres. And by doing that, you're also bringing the location of the data centre closer to the local districts that impact people, and you're able to put those outputs back into the local grid. Now, whether you use that, I think I saw yesterday that, was it Finland or lobster farming, they're using the heat from those. We can look at things like heating swimming pools, which I think is being done in the Netherlands. Greenhouse has been done in the Netherlands already. There's a whole raft of stuff we can do. And one of the things we could also be doing is helping people who can't afford their electricity bills by simply putting that power back to them. Now, John, before he flips over to you, you talked about the hyperscalers and the silos. And that's one of the things that the open communities and the open technologies will benefit most. And I have to say that we actually have a number of the hyperscalers working with us, collaborating with us, and looking at opening up what they're already doing in these silos and sharing it. And I think I said that the outputs, once we've built this for COP, the outputs will go into a foundation. They will be available for everybody to take and use and modify and refine. And it's just something that will sit there freely available. And that's one of the key beauties, I think, of the open source piece. Chris, you mentioned phones. And I think one of the critical pieces, not just with phones, but with all the devices we use day to day, is opening up the IP around that technology. And within open source, we've had defensive responses to things like patents for years. We have the biggest defensive patent organization with Open Invention Network, where we all collaborate and share our patents. And one of the challenges we see around opening up phones in particular is SEP, Standard Essential Patents, where you've got a standard that's tied to a patent. Now that patent just won't work with open source software. It sort of contradicts it by needing an extra license, and it adds cost burden. Brian, do you want to ask me that question again? Because I had all these notes and I've lost track of what you were asking.
I was just going to move on to software, but before we do that, John's got a response to your response, I think. So let's go back to John.
Yes, Amanda is so right. You know, there is a waste heat potential in data centers, and there are a number of examples across Europe that basically support that. And it's been an EU Code of Conduct best practice probably since the start, actually. So there's at least 12 years of it being in the code. So really, any data center that's been built in the last 10 years should have made reference to it. But unfortunately, we're not. We're using, still using 20th century designs for our 21st century data centers. And I've been calling for a radical rethink of the whole concept of a data center. And you know, the OCP goes a long way to meeting that call. I think one of the problems is when you start to think about using waste heat, is obviously that most people in the sector will say, oh, but waste heat, you know, it's only 35 degrees and heat diminishes through time and distance. But then with, you know, let's look at immersed technology, where the waste heat from an immersed compute solution is up at the 55 degrees. And that means you can actually use it. And that's what block heating are doing in Germany. And that's what a number of data centers in Europe have actually gone to, immersed compute technologies. The thing is, if you are going to integrate a data center with a local community, say in the form of a district heating grid, then you have to have buy-in from the local authority. It has to be thought about and put into the master plan for that district. And that's where the disconnect is happening at the moment. These people, you know, there is a lack of awareness within the planning people, and there is a lack of awareness within the data center operators. And they are miles apart. And there needs to be something that kind of forces that to happen. And I think the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, which was recently announced in January, has circularity for waste heat and a number of other access. So using green energy, energy efficiency, circular economy, circular waste heat, and reporting. And that's going through the EU Commission at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what transpires from that. But one of the key points of that is that they've got to start talking to the local communities. I'll give you an example. There is a data center that has been put into planning. I'm not going to tell you where it is because you'll easily find out who it is, and I don't want that to happen. But they've asked for, in their design, there is 60 diesel generators to provide backup for this site. And I know the site very well, and it's adjacent to a council estate, which is probably around 1930s, 1940s construction. And unfortunately, the area is known as, they are in fuel poverty. So I'm looking at that, I'm thinking 60 megawatts of backup generation. You need to be thinking about a CHP unit to provide power. And if you're going to do that, then you might as well use the waste heat and provide district heating for that community, because you are going to put a big data center next door to them. It's madness to even think about. Can you imagine 60 diesel generators all kicking off at once if there's a power failure? That poor community are going to be soaked in diesel fumes and noise. And it's not that hard to think, you know what, as a condition of planning, you, Mr. Data Center Operator, will provide district heating for that housing estate. And you will provide it at 50% discount to normal energy rates, so that these people are not spending 40% of their income on energy costs. That's the sort of thing we need to start thinking about.
Thank you, John. That's very interesting. Also, I saw Chris sort of half break down in tears when you mentioned the 60 diesel generators there.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, there's one thing that is worth really talking about when you think about climate, is that like space heating is like the next challenge after you electrify things. So it makes so much sense, but I really feel like there is a disconnect around this, largely because you've had two entirely separate communities who don't really have, or if there isn't much dialogue, and if there is, it's not necessarily a kind of constructive or kind of friendly dialogue a lot of the time. It's very much you're coming in here, putting a load and causing these other problems, rather than actually thinking about, okay, how can we integrate this? And that you can actually make an argument that this is one reason that this is something that we could celebrate more, or really kind of invest more in. Is actually talking about how can we design things such that they are complementary and considerately designed as part of the community, rather than being a kind of hillbilly hyperscaler out of town thing where we essentially just waste all of these things which are otherwise extremely useful sources of energy and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, just going back to what John was saying, and he mentioned OCP, I believe you mean Open Compute Project, who are another of our partners in the data center model. And I have a stat from them and IT Renew, which Ali would share with you if she was here, which is that IT Renew will ship 1 million OCP servers this year. And those are, recycled, repurposed and open. John, you mentioned local authorities. I can't say who it is because we've not finalised it yet. But again, with our model, we have a Scottish city, perhaps one you wouldn't expect, that are hoping to partner with us and actually build out the model. We won't build the data centre, obviously, but build out the model in their city and look at how we could do that. And I think there's probably a sort of stage now where it takes action and just going off and doing these things.
I actually think that, so in the UK, we've got 3 major data centre hubs. We've got East Docklands, so anywhere from Tower Hamlets out to Dagenham. We've got Slough and kind of that area, and then we've got Manchester. Now, if you want to build a data centre in any of those 3 locations, the planning department there are right on the case, because they've had to process applications from multiple suppliers. You go to somewhere like Birmingham or any of the smaller places, and the planning authority there, it's like, oh, what's a data centre? So the planning people need to, or the people that are putting in the designs on behalf of these people that are building out of town data centres, are educating them. And they're precisely the wrong people to educate them, because they've got the goal. They want the data center built, and they're going to use every trick in the book to try and get them to approve it. There was one recently near me that got approved, and again, it was one with 20 diesel generators, and I was just tearing my hair out. And I offered them some assistance as well, the planning department, and didn't even get a reply. But if we're going to have edge sites up and down the country, then there needs to be some guidance from the Department of Local Government, like, you know, the planning portal, which provides guidance to retailers and all sorts of other types of operators. There is no data center guidance on that portal at all.
Interesting point, John, and I know that BT are already building these edge data centers, repurposing some of their existing stock, and it's a model that we were very much looking at. I think, Brian, you actually asked me about software, and the hyperscalers come up a lot. And one of the things we see is that they use cloud native. I mean, public cloud is built on open source. It runs on Linux. It uses containers. They're automatically orchestrated with Kubernetes. That is transitioning into the data center space as well. And that's what we really want to drive, opening all of this up, because it really will have a massive impact on sustainability.
Lovely, thank you. Now, that's been a fascinating chat, and that's half an hour has basically shot by just there, folks. There's so much more we can talk about. The complexity of the issues, I think, have been well shown by some of the things you've said there. I also enjoyed your discretion on various things there, so that was very nice. Always appreciate that from a journalistic perspective. We've got a few questions coming. Let's just put a few of these to the panel before we wrap up in this particular section. Kim asks whether it's worth having education around device repair. I'm just going to go ahead and say that's a very good idea, and say thank you for that. But here's one for Chris. Chris, Julian asks, do you think wave and tidal power will ever be a significant part of the energy mix?
I actually don't think you're going to see much without people making a deliberate decision to bring the price down. I mean, what you currently see is a huge amount of money and time and effort being thrown at hydrogen right now as the great hope. And it may be, but I'll be honest, I would have to defer to energy analysts or speak to the Carbon Brief to kind of have up with some more useful stuff, because it's not really my area of expertise. No, I appreciate I let that on you, but John.
Yeah, I can. I think that, you know, things like the Severn Tidal Barrage and the other thing that was over in Cardiff Bay, which was canned by the government, was a very short-sighted decision. Because the thing is with wave and tidal is that it's very regular. You know when it's coming. It's completely different from solar and wind, because obviously they're weather related. But the tides are, you know, unless the moon decides to shoot off into the rest of the solar system, the tides are predictable, and they're predictable for years ahead. So I think tidal is a massive lost opportunity. And, you know, I mean, I think it's Denmark that is actually building an energy island in the North Sea, and their plans to put a data center on there because they know that the wind always blows there. So, you know,
Brian, can I pick up this as a final point in what you're saying about education? And I think that education goes across the board. You know, there's the professional and the prosumer education that's needed at one end, and at the other end, what we've got is kids coming through whose consumption is doubling. Number of internet users is pretty much doubling in the next few years from all the projections. And one of the things we've done is in our summer camp this year, I think it's lesson 6, actually talks. We've got sustainability through the whole series, and lesson 6 actually talks about data centers to key stage 3 kids and explains to them, you know, what fossil fuel consumption is and what good consumption is, and starts to look forward. And I think we need to get this into the education system as well across the board. Lovely, thank you. Tim has sent an interesting comment into us that this idea of designed obsolescence is often driven through sales and marketing. I'm not going to put that question as to how we can control that to the panel, because I feel that that's a whole other day-long event to discuss, but look out for maybe a future BCS webinar. We might be able to pick that one up, so thank you for that, Tim. Gary's also said, great to see this discussion about ethics and social responsibility in building data centers. Thank you very much for that. So that's half an hour, folks. Chris, we really appreciated your talk. John, your views, and Amanda, yours too. Been so interesting. You give us lots of different perspectives. I know you had another point, John. We'll have you on another time. Okay. And we'd like to thank you very much. And I'm going to move on to the next item on our agenda now. So thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting us. Cheers.
Yes, thanks for hosting us. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.